Appeals court reinstates hold on Texas immigration law. Now, this has been batted back and forth constantly. So the backstory on this is that, I believe it was last October, Greg of House Abbott, the governor of Texas, created a new law which would allow Texas state authorities to arrest, imprison, and deport illegal immigrants, which seems sensible to me. Seems like something that's needed. Last October, that was put into place, but it hasn't been able to be used. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happened between then and now, but as of recently, a court has put a hold on it. Then this, not the Supreme Court, but a court put a hold on that hold, which allowed them to enforce it. And now a court has put a hold on that hold of that hold, which prevents them enforcing it again. Well, you know what? It sounds silly, but this is possibly the correct way for a legal system to work. At least you've got a lot of powers that can sort of have an effect on it and can have their own say. You don't get just a carte blanche exercise of power. So, fine. Seems a bit multifaceted, but fine. Let's have a read, though. A federal appeals court issued an order late on Tuesday that reinstates a hold blocking Texas from enforcing a law that enables local law enforcement to arrest suspected illegal immigrants. This decision came from a 3-judge panel of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, voting 2-1 to overturn a previous ruling made by another panel of the same court that granted an administrative stay of the law's implementation. I'm not sure if the way they've written that is wrong. I thought that was the wrong way around in the intro, but I'm just going to ignore it. The prior Fifth Circuit ruling had temporarily halted an injunction from a federal district court judge in Austin who had blocked Texas from implementing the law. The Austin judge's rationale was that such a law might pave the way for other states to enact their own immigration legislation. Now, that sounds kind of stupid. Like, yes, they should be able to do that. They should do that. But from the perspective of the courts, I can see how they would want to sort of stick with the status quo a bit in terms of the federal government enforcing the borders. But the reason this is happening is because the federal government are derelicting that duty. Now, I've made clear before that whilst I agree that the federal government's roles, at minimum, are stuff like international diplomacy, national military, and borders, and one or two other things, international trade, for example. Whilst I think borders are among the few things they should be responsible for, I would also argue that they should not be the only group responsible for borders. And I was thinking about this before the show. How do you design a system whereby the federal government has default control, but the states can take over if needed, but where the federal group does not intersect with the state group and step on each other's toes and get into weird bureaucratic nightmare situations, so it runs smoothly. The idea I had is that the enforcement is done by state agencies, the federal government takes control of them by default, but the state can officially say, no, we're taking control of them now, we're doing it ourselves. Maybe that would work. Yeah, like each state has its own ICE. And then the state can take over that group if they need to. Essentially, that's what's been being done here. Not exactly, but in terms of the power being applied, they're saying our police can do this now. And I think it makes sense for it to be more than one group can do this, because if one group is failing to do it, then what's the response? So yeah, I would support Abbott here, but I can understand the courts being cagey on this because it probably is somewhat untrodden ground. I don't know, maybe it was normal in the past and should be still. Following the Tuesday night order, the Fifth Circuit will now hear arguments on whether to stay the preliminary injunction pending appeal on Wednesday, according to the order. Quote, a majority of the panel has concluded that the administrative stay entered in by a motions panel on March 2nd, 2024 should be lifted, reads the unsigned order by the court. Circuit Judge Andrew Oldham dissented from the majority opinion on Tuesday, advocating for a law to remain enforceable. He wrote in his dissenting opinion, I would leave that stay in place pending tomorrow's oral argument on the question. This came hours after the US Supreme Court's conservative majority is how they worded it, rejected an emergency request from the Biden admin to review the administrative stay ordered by the Fifth Circuit's prior panel. So Supreme Court, actually, this was a big piece of news, actually. Supreme Court actually appeared to be on Texas's side for this one, to let them enforce this law, even when Biden was the one requesting that they prevent them from enforcing the law. The Supreme Court said, no, we'll let them enforce this. But a different lower court says, no, prevent them from enforcing it, which surely should be overridden. Don't know. Either way, this is happening. But I suspect that the law will be allowed to be enacted, and I also suspect that if given enough time, it's still being kicked around and the problem is still present. Abbott will find a different way of dealing with it. I'm sure he can find a different way of dealing with it. He already did with the border, for example. And they're building Trump's wall, which is cool. I kind of wish that Abbott would explicitly credit Trump for it. I do wonder, though, chat, is this whole thing with Abbott pantomime? Maybe a long shot, but worth considering. Is it all just an act, all just pantomime, in order to finish Trump's wall before he becomes president, so they can say he didn't finish the wall? It seems like a big sacrifice to do that, but maybe. I mean, he could easily just shift around one or two minor definitions when he gets in, build a little bit more wall in some places, and then say, I finished it. And people will probably believe him, as long as the press doesn't jump in. It says that's so it might just be true. People were saying a couple of years ago that Greg Abbott was like not completely, but mostly uniparty. Like, I know that people have said, despite the fact Lindsey Graham has essentially said like good things, actually conservative things, he's very much uniparty, and I believe that. I've seen a lot of other things he said. Abbott, I think they were saying similar things about, but it seems like he's not, according to this. But he's building Trump's wall, and no one's talking about the fact that he's building Trump's wall except Abbott himself, which seems to imply to me that, I don't know, I suspect there's more sort of ulterior motive behind the scenes here than we know. I don't know yet. Whereas I don't think Abbott is thinking that far ahead. It seems like he is just dealing with the border crisis because his future political career depends on it. I hope that's it, Wes. I really hope that's it. I think that's the most likely to. As Kaiser Holt says, we should just have a giant golden T on every panel. The Department of Justice argued that the law is a clear violation of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution and that states do not have the power to enforce immigration laws. The law, it argued, would cause chaos in immigration law. I'm not sure if they're right about that. If they are, I don't think that should be how it's structured. I'm not sure if the Constitution explicitly says that states are not allowed to do that. I don't know. In a win for Texas, the Supreme Court issued an order earlier on Tuesday that effectively enabled the law, known as SB 4, to be enforced while lower courts deliberated. Should that not overrule them? Could Texas enforce the law and argue the Supreme Court has allowed it, therefore it's fine? Jack says they're right to an extent, but the Constitution also outlines that states are free to act if the federal government doesn't. Now, that seems sensible. The Supreme Court did not provide any reasons for the decision in its order, as is typical in emergency appeals. The decision passed onto the appeals court, and they issued the ruling on Tuesday evening. Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh filed concurring opinions. Concurring to what? To the anti-thing? I don't know. We'll move on from this article, but the sort of tennis match of batting back and forth whether Texas can do this continues, but it's a very important one, I think, because there probably are arguments, legal arguments on both sides as to whether they can or can't, but I think one side is just the better answer, and I hope that wins out in the end. But of course, you have to balance that with what the Constitution says.